Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about focusing on the annotation skills of summarizing and identifying golden lines. Summarizing is where we are going to write a short little summary on the side of a paragraph, just kind of talking about the main idea, just telling us what the paragraph is actually about. And golden lines are where we are going to identify lines in each paragraph that feel really important or feel like they encapsulate that main idea really well, and making sure that we note those down for our future reference. So yesterday we left off in paragraph 11 of MLK's letter from Birmingham jail, so that's where we're going to start today with this work. Okay, so paragraph 11. The purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. I therefore concur with you in your call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in a tragic effort to live in monologue rather than dialogue. Okay, MLK often makes this really easy for us. His opening lines of his paragraphs are usually pretty much tell us what we need to know and what's important. Okay, so that's my golden line right there, that first line. The purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. Okay, so then my summary on the side is that the point of protest is to open a dialogue or a conversation. Okay, so that's pretty much what MLK is saying in this paragraph, right? The point of protest is to open the door to a dialogue or a conversation. All right, paragraph 12. One of the basic points in your statement is that the action that I and my associates have taken in Birmingham is untimely. Some have asked, why didn't you give the new city administration time to act? The only answer that I can give to this query is that the new Birmingham administration must be prodded about as much as the outgoing one before it will act. We are sadly mistaken if we feel that the election of Albert Boutwell as mayor will bring the millennium to Birmingham. While Mr. Boutwell is a much more gentle person than Mr. Connor, they are both segregationists, dedicated to maintenance of the status quo. I have hoped that Mr. Boutwell will be reasonable enough to see the futility of massive resistance to desegregation, but he will not see this without pressure from devotees of civil rights. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. Lamentably, it is an historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture, but, as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. Okay. There's a lot to unpack in this paragraph, in paragraph 12. I think I'm going to put a bracket around the first part of paragraph 12 and maybe stop like right there, okay? He is talking a lot about the city government in Birmingham, and he's saying that the city government won't make change just because someone new was elected. Okay. And then, I think that down here, this line is really important. It is an historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. And I think that this It explains the reasons they keep protesting. Right? Because he's saying it is an historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. So he's saying that our protests are a way for us to get those privileged people to give up their privileges or to share their privileges with us. They won't do it unless we make a lot of noise, okay? Paragraph 13. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. Okay. Again, MLK does a really nice job in his opening lines. He's a very skillful writer in that way. The opening lines of his paragraphs are usually very, very powerful. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. So he's explaining why they keep going with protests. Okay? And then he also talks about down here, I've yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who haven't suffered from it. And he's saying, this wait has almost always meant never. So he's saying that when people call protests untimely, they want protesters to wait. But that usually means they'll never get what they want. Okay. Paragraph 14. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward gaining political independence, but we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait, but when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness toward white people, when you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored. When your middle name becomes Boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John. And your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs. When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments. When you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over, and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. Okay. I think this line right here. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. So that to me is a golden line because it's explaining, or it shows that the Black community has been through enough And I would summarize paragraph 14 by taking a look at, if we just look at the structure of paragraph 14, it's a super long, chunked paragraph, right? It's really, really long. There aren't a lot of breaks. And the length of this paragraph is really important because it's showing us, it's giving us these examples. It gives us an exhaustive list of examples of unfair treatment. Unfair isn't quite a strong enough word in my opinion. I can't quite think of another one though. Gives us an exhaustive list of examples of unfair treatment of the Black community. Okay, paragraph 14 does that for us. It shows us those injustices. All right, paragraph 15. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools, at first glance it may seem rather paradoxical for us consciously to break laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Okay, so this paragraph, paragraph 15, in my opinion, MLK is explaining to us the difference between a just and an unjust law. So, paragraph 15. Or it tells us that there are just and unjust laws. It doesn't quite explain the difference. It tells us that there are just and unjust laws. Okay? And then I think my golden line and your golden line might be a little bit different than mine, and that's okay. Mine is right down here. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Okay, paragraph 16. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. Segregation, to use the terminology of the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, substitutes an I-it relationship for an I-thou relationship and ends up relegating persons to the status of things. Hence, segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically unsound, it is morally wrong and sinful. Paul Tillich has said that sin is separation. Is not segregation an existential expression of man's tragic separation, his awful estrangement, his terrible sinfulness? Thus it is that I can urge men to obey the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court, for it is morally right, and I can urge them to disobey segregation ordinances, for they are morally wrong. Okay. So, paragraph 16 seems to be where we get the difference, right? And, even again in the first line, now what is the difference between the two? That's MLK signaling to us, okay, this paragraph is going to be about the difference between a just and an unjust law. Okay? So, there are quite a few things that we could put as golden lines. So if you have more than one golden line per paragraph, that's totally fine. Now, I think that right here, a just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. and an unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. So he's saying just laws are moral, unjust are immoral. Okay? An unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just, and any law that degrades human personality is unjust. Okay? So I think that's important too. Any law that uplifts human personality is just, and any law that degrades human personality is unjust. And I think I'm going to kind of encapsulate that in saying honoring humanity is just, but dishonoring humanity is unjust, right? Because that's what he means when he says personality, right? He's talking about seeing somebody as a person, seeing somebody as human. Okay. Let's go to paragraph 17. Let us consider a more concrete example of just and unjust laws. An unjust law is a code that a numerical or power majority group compels a minority group to obey but does not make binding on itself. This is difference made legal. By the same token, a just law is a code that a majority compels a minority to follow and that it is willing to follow itself. This is sameness made legal. So here I think it's really interesting. An unjust law is a code that a power majority group compels or makes a minority group obey but doesn't obey itself. So he's saying that a just law applies to everyone. That's what I'm getting out of paragraph 17. Right down here. All right. Paragraph 18. Let me give another explanation. A law is unjust if it is inflicted on a minority that, as a result of being denied the right to vote, had no part in enacting or devising the law. Who can say that the legislature of Alabama, which set up the state segregation laws, was democratically elected? Throughout Alabama, all sorts of devious methods are used to prevent Negroes from becoming registered voters. And there are some counties in which, even though Negroes constitute a majority of the population, not a single Negro is registered. Can any law enacted under such circumstances be considered democratically structured? Okay, so it looks like in paragraph 18, MLK is bringing up the issue of voter rights in the South. Okay, so he's talking about voter rights in the South. If the black community can't vote, on the laws are unjust. And I think this question that he asks, can any law enacted under such circumstances be considered democratically structured? That's my golden line. And to me, that points out, if you have no say in the laws that affect you, that law is unjust. Okay, paragraph 19. Sometimes a law is just on its face and unjust in its application. For instance, I have been arrested on a charge of parading without a permit. Now, there is nothing wrong in having an ordinance which requires a permit for a parade, but such an ordinance becomes unjust when it is used to maintain segregation and to deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest. Okay, so again, another golden line right at the beginning. Sometimes a law is just on its face and unjust in its application. And then he gives an example of applying a just law unjustly. Okay, I hope you are able to see the distinction I am trying to point out. In no sense do I advocate evading or defying the law, as would the rabid segregationists. That would lead to anarchy. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. Okay, I think this last line is really a golden line and pretty much the explanation of this paragraph, okay? So he's saying that breaking unjust laws actually shows respect for the law itself. Because if the point of laws is to maintain justice, then it's important to raise awareness of when laws are unjust. Let's go through paragraph 21. Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evidenced sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pain of chopping blocks rather than submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. To a degree, academic freedom is a reality today because Socrates practiced civil disobedience. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. So this paragraph, he is just citing historical and biblical examples of breaking unjust laws. Okay, so that is how we apply that idea of a golden line and summarizing to our annotations. We're going to go ahead and do some more practice with this in our books. And thank you for paying attention and listening. If you have questions, you can always send me a chat.